Good morning and welcome to our UBC Learning Circle, Healing from Trauma. Today's conversation is presented in partnership with Center for Excellence in Indigenous Health and the Indian Residential School Survivors Society. We'd like to thank the First Nations Health Authority for generously funding the UBC Learning Circle and allowing us to have these conversations. Before I formally begin, I'd like to acknowledge with respect and gratitude that I'm joining you from the unceded territories of the Musqueam peoples. Please feel free to introduce yourselves and the nation you're calling in from in the chat box. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Serene Squawkin. I'm the Learning Circle Manager. I am Seal Okanagan on my mother's side and Hickory, Apache, and Belgian on my father's side. I'll be your moderator for today's discussion. Joining us today working behind scenes is Cynthia, our production coordinator, and our program assistant, Nicole Northpagan. They'll be interacting with everyone in the chat. And finally, before we get into today's discussion, I'll just provide a gentle heads up that the topics covered may be sensitive or emotionally triggering. Please make sure that you are looking after yourself, and if at any point you need to talk to an elder, friend, counselor, or family member, don't hesitate to do so. We have some prompts in the chat. Now I'll turn it over to our panelists to introduce themselves.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Jordy Johnson. So as Serene has mentioned, we are covering some topics that may be triggering. They may trigger big emotions or thoughts. So the Indian Residential School Survivor Society encourages you to take care of yourself, of your whole self. So we do have a IRSSS crisis line at 1-800-721-0066 if you require further support and assistance. All right, so to start us off in a good way, I'm going to pass it over to Henry Morgan to share some words. And then we will move into our round of introductions.
Mahelu, good morning. I just wanted to open us up in a good way to allow ourselves to be present and to protect ourselves as we are sitting by our computers, and sometimes knowing that we inadvertently, vicariously pick up some stuff as we listen to things. So if you are feeling that you're needing to protect yourself, to turn a little bit sideways. So just so to allow the conversation to go past us, right? Because when we're sitting here directly against it, all communication is coming directly at us, and sometimes we pick up someone's story and it sits with us and it impacts us throughout the day. So just a little tip on how to protect yourself. And I'll just start with a prayer prior to us starting. You can have your eyes open or your eyes closed and pray to the Creator or God or a person of your understanding to allow yourself to give strength today. Creator, I just ask you to be with us today and keep our minds open and our hearts open to know that what is being shared today is shared in a good way to allow people to see and understand and look at what is healing. For each individual, it is different. To know that some of this today may sit with you in a good way, some may sit with you with a question. I just ask you, the Creator, to guide each person that's present to allow them to connect to the support that they need and to understand and get clarification. I ask the Creator to be gentle with our hearts and our minds, to know that today is a very beautiful day, whether the sun is shining, the rain is pouring, or if it's cloudy outside, just know that the Creator has provided the space for you today. And just allow yourself to be grounded. Take nice deep breaths. And just allow yourself to know that what you are about to be a part of today is about healing. And to know that each journey has its own path and how we walk on this earth in a very gentle manner. We are taught by our ancestors, we are shown by our aunts and uncles, our grandparents. We're shown by those people in our communities, in our area, whether we're in urban settings or not. We're always being shown and guided in a good way. We just have to sit and allow that to be coming in a good way. And to always remind ourselves, we are being shown something, but we have our own ancestral knowledge that we carry, and that'll connect us and guide us in our own journey. I just say all my relations, and I look forward to today.
Thank you, Henry, for those wonderful words and starting this presentation off in a good way. So wake dan a wake mac wickchin blat de sig so squest eskedam ulach de sequatin. Good morning, everybody. My name is Jordy Johnson. I carry the traditional name Sahumir, and I'm from the Eskedam First Nations, which is part of the Secwepemc tribe. I come to you today as the Manager of Development, and I'm joined by my friends. So I'll pass it over to Veronica.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Veronica Haddon. I'm calling in today from the unceded territory of Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish nations. I usually work and live in Lheidli territory. I am of mixed descent. I am Anishinaabe and on my mother's side, and I am Cree on my father's side, as well as some Ukrainian and Finn background. I am currently the Senior Manager at Indian Residential School Survivors Society, and I help with the Indian Day School Coordinators Program, as well as the Northern Trauma Informed Cultural Support Workers Program. And just really grateful to be here today. Henry.
Good morning. My name is Henry Morgan. My traditional name is Askusal. My name was given to me from my auntie. I was originally given a traditional name when I was 13 years old, but I didn't use it and I lost it. My brother was given a name at the same time and he kept his name. So I was re-given a name when I was 35 years old. So I'm very grateful that my auntie was able to be a part of my life, and my mother and my parents and my community. I come from the Gitxsan Nation, and I live in Anspioch, which is Kispiox, BC. I live and work here, and I live and work in Prince George, currently transitioning back to my community. So I am the Trauma-Informed Cultural Support Worker Coordinator. So I work with a team that provides a trauma crisis response to communities within the north of BC. So I'm very grateful to be here today. Thank you. And I'll pass it to Tara.
Hi team, my name is Tara William. I'm one of the trauma-informed cultural support workers that work under Henry. I'm one of 7 on our team. I am of Gitxsan Wet'suwet'en descent, raised with the Wet'suwet'en governance system in Wet'suwet'en. I'm also based out of the traditional territory and calling in from Burns Lake, our traditional territory of the Wet'suwet'en, calling in from Burns Lake. Thank you.
Thank you. So it's great to see everybody introducing themselves in the chat. And it's great to see that we have many friends from across the nation. So once again, if you'd like to provide your who you are and where you're from, please feel free to use the chat as well during the presentation. If you do have questions, we do have people in the background who will collect those questions for a Q&A at the end. So what our agenda is going to look like is first we'll have a discussion on First Nations wellness and well-being, moving on to the importance of healing, and then the inherent disparities in health and wellness, and then looking at a culturally safe approach in healing, and culture and collective kindness. And finally, we will move into the power of connection. So just to provide some context, in the province of British Columbia, there are more than 200 First Nation communities. There are 33 distinct languages. So what this is this provides a notion that there are some collective similarities between nations, but also there are uniquenesses between, of course, when we have a province this large. So the uniqueness does provide different journeys for health and wellness for each for each community, each person. Yeah, so we will move into our next slide here on the importance of healing, intergenerational, collective, and vacacious impacts. So I will move over to Veronica if she wants to help start us off here.
Yes, thank you. I'm just navigating my technical stuff. Yeah, so we really just want to talk about the importance of healing, intergenerational, collective, and vicarious impacts. So we know that there's like a really recent history of the colonial project that has deeply impacted our people with land displacement, lots of different things and diseases. There's been an imposition of Western medical practices, land tenure systems, languages, and foods. We've had a segregation and the establishment of reserves. There's been the setup of Indian residential schools in Canada, which has really resulted in intergenerational trauma. With that intergenerational trauma, we are still dealing with and continue to deal with unresolved grief, violence. There's been fatigue in standing up for the justice and truth across generations. And lots of adverse childhood experiences, right? And so that has resulted in forced disconnection or detachment from our culture, languages, and ways of doing and knowing. And so knowing all of this, our team really works with that collective trauma. There has been a collective trauma. It's not just mine, it's not just yours. All of us have experienced that at different varying degrees, and it shows up in traumatic experiences that we know that are often in the news today. We can think of our missing murdered Indigenous women, girls, Two-Spirit relatives. We know that we're experiencing that through the toxic drug losses currently, through RCMP violence, through many different forms that we see contemporary right now. So that would be the collective, and I'll have Henry and Tara talk a bit more about that in a minute. I'm just giving a bit of an overview. Talk about vicarious trauma or lived experiences that each of us have likely experienced. Could be something from poverty, substance use, lateral violence, not accepting of different genders, even neurodiversity. So those are vicarious things. And altogether, we have something that's called complex trauma. And that's where I'll pass it over to Henry and Tara to really talk about vicarious, the collective, and
Yeah, good morning again. Definitely the intergenerational and collective and vicariousness sits with us. And it sits with us every day. And we move through those things on a regular basis from the moment we wake up, when we go to our jobs, and we go to these spaces where sometimes we are challenged by the governmental process in which we have to follow in order to be a civilized person in BC. So some of us may have to go to work in a government office, some of us may have to go into a school system, some of us have to work just in environments where it's unhealthy and they're challenged, right? So definitely being a part of the intergenerational collective, myself is not attending residential school, but day school. It still impacted me in my life. I vicariously picked up a lot of different things from my parents and my older brothers that went to residential school, and my children are still feeling those impacts today as well. They are still going through that. So one of the teachings that I've been shared with is that it's 7 generations that are needed for healing. And right now we're just in that cusp of beginning and looking what healing is and how we are finding our strength within multiple systems and creating a voice to share the importance of having our Indigenous methods of healing being brought forward. And I think that's one of the biggest pieces in importance of healing is having our own inherent teachings to support us through that, right? And as a collective, we're all at different stages. We're all at, but if one person heals, I believe if one person can work on their healing, it impacts the generations from them within their generation to the next generation, and it even impacts like their parents' generation. So like that healing is guides others, and they witness and they see it and they want a part of it. And I see that within my own family with like I'm able to have conversations with my parents. I'm able to have conversations with my brothers and sisters. I'm able to have conversations with my children and my grandchildren. So just right there shows you the importance of healing. So I'll let Tara share some things.
Thank you, Henry. A couple of weeks ago, we were in Kamloops, and I did a presentation to, it was actually survivors, and it was very strange for me to be a young girl up, I'll call myself young, to be in front of the group, and it was all survivors of Indian residential school, and the topic was the impacts of Indian residential school. So I was a little bit nervous, and I was in discussion with them, and they asked how can we start the discussion of healing within our communities? How do we get started? And what came to my mind immediately was my mom. My mom was going through a very difficult transition in life, and she knew herself that she was needing to change her ways, change her thinking. So she started her healing path before, but there was a chance that she took on a self-development program where she really impacted our community by taking that step and for herself. And it made a huge ripple effect within not only our small family, but our community. And then it rippled out into the neighboring communities where people, like our community, started to see the importance of healing and how much joy it brings when you start to release all of those traumas that you're holding. With the topic of intergenerational trauma, I'm also a single parent, so having those discussions with my kids, I just had the discussion with my oldest son on our way home the other day about what life was like for me growing up, and how I didn't go into detail of things that I've experienced, but how a lot of the kids that I went to school with experienced the same abuse, or from, I guess, what we would call the working poor, where we had to ration our foods. There's and a lot of witnessing of either violence or alcohol abuse. So explaining to him how that when I became a mother, that those are things that I wanted to protect them from, and that I didn't want that cycle to continue. Also respecting and knowing that my parents did the best that they could at that time and with what they knew. And so being respectful and mindful of that. So him knowing that when he grows up, that it's not all his, if that's the path that he goes down. But I already see that those cycles are being broken. My son's 19 and he chooses not to be a part of the alcohol scene, or I just let him know that my home is completely dedicated to them and it's their space. It's not my space, it's their safe space. So they wouldn't have to experience or witness things that I had. So there was a lot of protectiveness that came out as Mama Bear. Thank you.
Thank you, Tara. Thank you, Henry and Veronica. So yes, it's also important to learn, of course, because I myself as an intergenerational survivor haven't learned the true impacts of Indian residential school or the other impacts that affect First Nations people. I didn't learn this until I was probably a teenager. And even then it took a moment to realize why that still impacts myself. And even as I'm getting into the late adult stages of my life, I'm still learning. So it's a learning path moving forward. So we'll move on to our next section here. The health and wellness disparities of First Nations people. So we did discuss a little bit on this within our last slide, but we'll maybe go a little more into detail, starting with Veronica once again.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, so I just want to talk about, we understand a little bit the intergenerational trauma. We talked a little bit about Indian residential schools. There's been a lot of displacement of our people. There is day schools. That's what our team has been working with, a 60 scoop. There's just lots of different intergenerational things that we've all sort of endured. We know people who have attended. I think I saw something that no one my age, anybody my age, which is late 40s, has somebody in our family who's attended either residential school, day school, or has been impacted by some of these things. And that really brings up a lot of, we think about social determinants of health, like how do we maintain our health? How can we stay healthy if we're not connected to our land, if we're not connected to our people in a really healthy way? And there's lots of symptoms of being unwell. We see a huge number of people with chronic diseases within our communities, huge. Currently, especially post-pandemic, we see a lot of elevated anxiety and depression. We know that there's a lot of substance use health needs and concurrent disorders. When we talk about the toxic drug overdoses, a lot of our people do have concurrent disorders, right? Mental health disorders, as well as some substance use. That they really require some really dedicated work and services, which we know that there are health disparities, that we don't always get treated with respect. Very rarely are we treated with respect in the health system in different areas, or access to healthcare is huge. I know in the north, especially, that's where I live, that is something that we definitely experience on a regular basis. Tara spoke about poverty. I definitely have had some experience of that as a child, but especially as a young mom myself, and have some I'm a bit of a food hoarder. I have all my pantries. I have 3 pantries. I have lots of freezers full, and that is a trauma response. I know that that's something that I've worked with my own therapist with. How do I ensure that my children are going to be fed? Is it a reflection on myself if I don't have, it's based out of fear? How do I work with that? I kind of wanted to go back a little bit to the chronic diseases and just share some stuff. Just some personal anecdotes around chronic diseases. So many people in my own family, especially the women, and we have all been part of intergenerational trauma and have experienced displacement and marginalization. And women, especially in my family, but some of the men, we have these complex chronic diseases. And we're all being seen by, the BC Women's Hospital or different hospitals throughout, BC, but also in Canada. And, it's really a reflection on what our access to healthcare has been. How do we deal with things that are coming up? medical gaslighting, those kinds of things. And which in turn, it's a collective trauma. When we think back to the previous slide around intergenerational trauma, the collective, a lot of us are holding, especially the women, I'll speak on behalf of what I know better is, we're holding a lot of this in our bodies. And also the vicarious, right? When we see our family members not being treated well. And in the work that we're doing is that we're really trying to not hold that. Henry talked about that this morning, before he started his prayer, like to protect ourselves, just moving to the side. So we're not always holding all of that. And I'll get Henry and Tara to talk a little bit more about that a little bit later in our presentation around, just not holding it so we can protect ourselves. I'll pass it to Henry now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Definitely, there's so many things to think about when it comes to health and wellness and disparity of First Nations people. I can only speak on my own experience and what I've witnessed, what I've been a part of, what I see within my own family, right? And having to be an advocacy in the downtown of Prince George for multiple First Nations who struggle with addictions or disease, and just because I have a title attached to me as an outreach worker or addiction counselor, those kind of things, they would listen to me, but they would not listen to the individual who was speaking because they felt it wasn't, in my eyes, I felt that they didn't acknowledge them as a person, right? So when a person always has to bring an advocacy with them, what does that say about a system in which we are moving through, trying to move through? And Prince George is a space in which access is easier than on reserves like our community, First Nations community, because like living in Kispiox, where I'm moving to, if I want to go see a doctor now, it's going to take me almost 3 weeks just to get in to see a doctor. And they will only answer one thing. So, and I speak with my parents who struggle with multiple complex health issues. And if they have to wait 3 weeks to go see a doctor, it's very challenging on them to have anything resolved for them because they don't have extended health benefits and they're not going to jump and help because they don't have that. They don't have access to proper care. And when it comes to like the Indian hospitals itself, the impacts on our people, the generational impacts from the Indian hospitals where they did experiments on and they lost that trust and relationship with First Nations. My dad was one of those individuals, right? And being taken away from their community, being subjected to care that wasn't necessary, right? And even today, there's like, you can go to a specialist and if based on who you are and what you have, like I've been in specialist appointments with my dad, and it's been like 5 seconds. Nothing wrong with you. See you later. But yet there is something wrong. And my dad's been saying it since they experimented on his ear. So, and that's 70 years, right? So definitely it's something that's impacted us all. And we carry that as soon as we walk into any health space. As soon as we walk into it, we carry that when we walk into even a grocery store or a department store, we carry that. Oh, there you hear it on the radio or on the sound system, security or those kind of things, right? So, and we have to be proper and sit there and not say anything when we see the wrongdoings of something or we're dismissed. So yeah, so definitely, those are some things that I can think about when I look at that. And improper diagnosing, like when we look at our homeless people population, there's so much brain injury out there. I believe like there's so much brain injury out there that they're not even looking at that as a thing for them. That how do we support a person with a brain injury? They're just looking at the addiction, right? And looking at their homeless. That's what their priority is, but not the actual diagnosis of what's actually going on with this person and how can we support them. So I'll share that, pass it on to Tara to share some things.
Thank you. So just to add on a bit of what Veronica was discussing, there's also violence of women and the 2S LGBTQIA and the elders and the MMIWG2S communities. There's the youth well-being that we see on the ground in communities. What I've seen in the majority of the communities that we've visited, there is a huge shortage of mental health staff. And even within our local high school here in Burns Lake, there's a wait list for youth to see counselors. And sometimes it takes a year or two before they can get in. And what I've noticed is that all of our communities have experienced so much grief over the last few years with COVID and losing people, that the parents of these youth are so deep into their grief and their loss that the kids are seeing it and they don't know how to cope with mom and dad grief, going through their grieving process. So they're kind of left to the side to try to find their own resources and not understanding what's going on with mom and dad. So that's where I guess the teachers and the staff at the school are heavily relied on to be kind of like those mental health providers for our youth. So that's one thing that I've been able to see and experience myself, as my kids have to also be on that wait list for the high school. The other thing is men's health. I feel really proud of the men that stand up and reach out for help, because I know it's not easy. Like they've lived that with that mentality that they need to be strong, that they need to not show emotion, that they have to be this person. And there's not a whole lot of resources out there to support the men in our communities. They've probably gone through the same struggles along as the women do. And what I see for them too is that there's a lot of injustices that happen with our men, and there's just not a lot of resources there to support them. Going back to also supporting Henry's statement about the homelessness, the unsheltered. In one of our presentations, it was also listed houselessness. There's overcrowded houses in a lot of our communities because there's no homes available. So it's either you stay in a crowded home or you choose to live in a shelter or somewhere where you're going to create your own environment. So there's a lot of things that we've seen on the ground. For myself, with my own experience with anxiety and depression, it came when there was a breakdown in life, where I just didn't know how to cope. I didn't know how to reach out for resources. I didn't know what was available to me. And I know that one day I just got tired of feeling the way that I did. I didn't want to be fearful. I didn't want to be scared. I didn't want to model that type of life for my kids. I wanted to be a strong, independent mom. to my kids to teach them and to show them that there is a different way. There is a different way to work through things. There was points in my life where I did have a lot of alcohol involved in my life, and I always wondered why I just didn't feel good after that. And it took a little bit of learning for me to really understand that the alcohol prolonged my depression. It made me feel worse at the end, and it really amplified that depression and that anxiety for me when I was coming down from it, from my highs. So it took, once I understood that and realized that, that's when I kind of made that, and it kept me vulnerable. It kept me vulnerable to continue making those bad decisions for myself that weren't really healthy for me or my kids. So, and accepting things into my life that didn't serve me good. So it was a process, and it is still like nice. It's like it was a nice learning opportunity for me. And if you have the resources to look around about that, like I think my eye opener was a presentation on the impacts of your brain when you're heavily involved with addictions. There was a different scale on if you had one drink a day or one drink a week, or if you binge drank, and it showed like images of your brain and then talked about how you can't replace those things or how you can't fix those things. That was my scare. So I was like, okay, I got it, I'm good. But it really taught me to be curious and learn about all of these feelings that I was carrying, and to be brave and courageous to look at it and why I was feeling the way that I was, and to work through it. So at times it wasn't easy, but the payoff in the end is rewarding, because I see it in my kids of the healthy decisions that I've chosen to make for my family. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing, Tara. That was very moving and powerful. And yes, just to echo on the accessibility that, that some of our people face throughout the province differs from different areas. And also just touching upon that stigmatism that we often face within the First Nations community. Because back home, we had something called city clothes or your town clothes that you had to wear to go to the hospital. And I'm certain that not everybody had to experience that, where you had to change your clothes just so you could enter the city. And, you know, so those were some of our solutions back then. And before we move on, I just want to also raise my hands to Henry for all the support that you've been providing within men's health care in the North. So thank you for all that work, Henry, for everything that you do up in the North for the men. All right, so we're going to move into our next slide, which is a culturally safe approach to healing. So Veronica, we're going to turn it back over to you.
Great, thank you so much. Just love all the sharing and seeing all the questions and stuff that are coming up. So I really want to go into, let's first just take a collective big deep breath again. It's a lot sharing and hearing those personal stories that we can all relate to. I know that we all have those experiences, just like what Jordy was saying about your town clothes. I had a conversation with my parents and my brother last night around that, about, you know, what we would do to keep ourselves safe and not be targets growing up. And my mom's generation, my generation, my grandma's generation of, you know, making sure that we're perfectly dressed when we would go out in public. So we weren't targets. And yeah, and these conversations are still happening and still understanding those. And my children are still like understanding what that means for them. So I just want us to just make sure your feet are on the ground. Relax your shoulders a little bit. Just take a deep cleansing breath. And through your nose, out through your mouth. Just another one. Just another, create some extra space. because those are collective experiences. We don't want to hold on to that. We want to acknowledge it, but we don't want to hold on to that. Thank you. We're going to move into this discussion around a culturally safe approach to healing. And that's really the beautiful work that our teams are doing within IRSSS. I'm more familiar with the work that our Northern Trauma Informed team is doing. Henry and Tara, we have 5 other team members, and really they are just so culturally rooted and understand trauma and work through that trauma-informed lens, but Indigenous perspective. All of our team, almost except for 2 of us who are still doing some training, are doing Indigenous focusing oriented therapy. Lots are doing somatic training as well. Different training, everyone has their own sort of specialties. And so when we talk about cultural safety, it means that we want to eliminate harm towards Indigenous people, First Nations people, Métis people, who are in systems. And by doing that, we support them in an we make sure that we know that there's anti-Indigenous specific racist policies and training at all levels, right? And it's not just our, as an Indigenous person, it's not just my responsibility for unlearning this. All of us have a responsibility in unlearning those systemic racist policies or systems that we all work and live in. And so we also, how can we be anti-racist? We can learn the history of where we live, not only in the community, the town, the city that we live, in BC, throughout Canada, North America, right? We can get curious, like Tara says. How can we get curious? Not just about a land acknowledgement. That's perfect. It's great that we're doing that. But really, who are the people that we live and work beside within our communities? How can we understand how genocide has impacted First Nations people within BC, Canada, in North America, right? If we can sit beside them and witness their truths, when we can listen firsthand to what they're sharing, that helps us move into an anti-racist space and start practicing those culturally safe practices, having those safe spaces. Some other things that we can do is speak up against stereotypes. We know that there's tons of stereotypes. I'm a stereotype. I was a young mom. I was a young Indigenous mom. I remember when I was 17 years old and somebody I went to high school with that I thought was a friend, you know, made some really demeaning remarks and about me, and like, oh, of course you're having a kid young, and you know, that stayed with me until now, 30 years later, that was that stereotype. Not even recognizing, you know, where that came from for her, right? So how can we, you know, be allies and stand up against stereotypes and discrimination and biases? We all have them. I have them myself, you know, and just really getting curious. And where does that stem from? Is it something that I grew up hearing within my own family? Is it something that I grew up hearing at school? Is it something that is kind of in mainstream media? You know, we know social media has a big impact on our thought process. Another way to really make it culturally safe is recognizing our own privilege. I know that I have some. I could be, I'm easily can maneuver through both white and Indigenous systems because of how I look. I'm fair-skinned. I do, you know, it's a privilege and a curse sometimes. But, you know, just recognizing that, you know, I come from a place of privilege because that some people might consider because I have a degree, or, you know, I have a vehicle. Those are places of privilege. Something else that we could maybe, if we're listening with, I'm going to pass this over to Henry about listening with 2 ears. Yeah. Thanks, Henry.
Thanks, Veronica. Definitely a lot of things to think about. As you're speaking, I was looking at this, a culturally safe approach to healing. And when we look at entities as the education system, and we look at those spaces of accepted practices, right? And I think about my education piece when going through things at the college and high school and those kind of things. It's just, there was never they have this thing called a trauma approach, but we have an Indigenous trauma approach, which is completely different, because as our team goes out into communities and supports events, we are providing a in-depth support system that we have lived with our whole lives. We've been a part of it, and we're supporting others who are moving through it. So just knowing that the work that we do is sometimes not acknowledged in those spaces when it comes to getting your education. I think of appropriation sometimes when I think of some entities out there that are providing a culturally safe approach to healing when they use Indigenous, but they are not Indigenous themselves. So some of those things come to my mind when I hear those things. I look at in our jobs, if we take like Indigenous focusing oriented therapy is a program that I've taken with Shirley Turcott at the Justice Institute, but it is not acknowledged within the education realm. It's called like you're improving your job by doing this certification, but it's not an accredited thing. It's not acknowledged by universities as like you can't use it, or they'll take it into consideration, even though you get credits. But that training of trauma informed and looking at an ancestral pathway in order to sit with trauma gave me the tools that I needed, and how to sit with trauma, how to work with trauma, and how to even do that within myself and my family, right? And when we look at our learnings, like we learn by our stories, we learn by our experience, right? And when I took that course, everything in it just strengthened what I already knew. So once I was able to learn how to have a conversation and being able to sit with a family member, a brother, a community member, a nation, I knew that if I can see where, like, if I could see where they are and how they sit with trauma, and if I can leave them some tools and how to move through it. Just like today, just a simple connect and protect. We're allowing ourselves those harmful things to go past us, but we're still connecting, right? I believe in two-eyed seeing is like we have to live in both worlds. Like there's no way out of it. Like we have to live it, and we have to know how to move through it. So yes, there is some strengths within each model, an Indigenous model and the medical model and those kind of things. Like we have to take those both into considerations. In the end, it's a choice of a person, ability to select which one they want and feel comfortable with. Yeah, I think that's what I can share for now. So I'll pass Tara so she can share some things.
Yeah, so just for people to know that when we get called out into community, that the green shirt that Henry's wearing, I will take every opportunity not to wear it. Green's not my color, but you will find us in those green shirts. I think a majority of our staff wear them when we're in community because they do want us to stand out, especially on an orange shirt day. Then you're able to find somebody to help quickly. when we're working with communities in crisis, we're there to watch for signs or symptoms of somebody that might be really highly activated, and we'll go and work with them. We don't just approach anybody, and so you don't need to be afraid of us. We're human just as much as everybody else. We will make a relationship through friendship, just to find a common area of bonding. The other thing is how to ask for help is just to say, hey, I could use some support right now. I need to talk to somebody. Can you direct me to somebody, or can you be my person? There's different ways that you can also approach us. Also, if you're wanting us to have some privacy while you're in your moment, just ask us to put a jacket on, so to cover up our green shirt, so you're not having that attention from the other crowds and stuff. If you need a private moment, just say, can we go somewhere private to talk? So there's that kind of approach for us. We're not just going to jump into your face and try to fix you. So that's all I wanted to add. Thank you.
Thank you, Tara. Thank you, Henry and Veronica. Just a reminder of one of the slides that we did have earlier today, where looking at the culturally safe approach, we got to be reminded that there are 203 unique First Nations communities. Not taking a pan-Indigenous approach and believing that one culture fits all. So there is uniqueness towards each tribe, towards each language and each community. So I think that's very important to also understand here. We did have a few questions, but we will circulate back to those at the end of the presentation. So we do see your questions. All right, so we will move into the next section here, which is healing through culture and collective kindness. So Veronica, thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to, this picture was provided to us by one of our team members, Sandra Harris. And Sandra has been doing work throughout not only the province, but Canada for many, many years. And she is an IFOT practitioner. She is such a gentle and not giant, kind and gentle soul. My words are getting mixed up there. And oftentimes you will see for both FNHA and for us, she will do online grief and loss she'll have some online space for people just to come in, and she just helps us. And she just helps us sort of not hold on to those big feelings and just be there to witness it and let it go. And I just really want to talk about that. I was reminded when I was thinking about this picture, I just wanted to acknowledge that she took this picture. I think it's from ISKIT in an event that she did there. She was helping her and Tara and several of our other team members. We just got off of a 6 community road trip for the MMIWG conferences that our other team members were putting on, and Sandra has such a beautiful, calm voice that everyone on our team wants her to record lullabies or stories to fall asleep to. She can make some money on the Calm app, I'm sure. And it's just really a reminder of how to, we can heal with being gentle. Right, we've experienced so much violence in different ways, whether it be through physical, but also like there's violence in other ways that we've experienced things. And so we really want to sort of just take a step back and just be calm when we're, really looking at what healing is for ourselves. And when we think about culture, ways that we can, reconnect to our culture, there's many of us who didn't grow up in our home community for many different reasons, whether it be like financial or, intermarriages back in the day before one, lots of different things. How can we work at learning our language? How can we get connections to our sacred lands? Some other ways that we experience healing is through humor. We're always joking, we're always making fun of each other in kind ways. You know, even some of my colleagues yesterday, we were talking about, you know, I was quite emotional and they're laughing at me about being like the emotional auntie. And then I started laughing because I was trying to tell a joke and I couldn't even get it out because I was laughing so hard. And then, you know, pointing and making fun. You know, humor is important for us to physically get out some of those things when we think about somatics and how we can like move our bodies to get out some of that stuck energy, and humor helps us do that. Some other ways that I think are really important is through trading. Trading is something beautiful that I really appreciate. You know, lots of us are able to do some different crafts and stuff. And this isn't traded, but this was a gift to me from my brother Henry here, and it has some protection. And you know, part of the trading is, you know, me sharing some stuff with him and him sharing with me to help. And it's bringing in the plant medicines to help me stay grounded in the work that we do. Yeah, so I'll just end it in a little place around, you know, there's those teachings about walking softly. How can we walk softly, and not only with ourselves and be curious, but with our kinship, right? Whether it be the plants or the water or our peers or our family. I would just leave that with you all. How can you get curious about walking?
Hegel in. That's what we're taught in the Gitsan. Hegel in. Walk softly. When a new chief is introduced into the system, we holler that out to them. Eglian Samogat. Walk softly, because we know that the path that you're on is going to have some challenges, and you're going to have to move through that the best way you can. And with this picture in front of us here is a medicine bundle. And we use that to move through stuff. We use it for protection of our own selves. We allow the teachings of our ancestors to guide us through in a gentle way. Keep that balance within ourselves, and a lot of us refer to the medicine wheel. When we look at balance of our mental health, our emotional health, our spiritual, and our physical, we use it to look at the elements of the land, air, water, and fire. As we light the smudge from the land, we use the shell from the water. The air is from the smoke, is the air elements, right? So we utilize all of that. And when we lean into the land, we're allowing ourselves to be supported by the land as we're dealing with trauma, as we're dealing with anything in what we're trying to work through. It could be as simple as a communication, having a conversation. If we lean into the land and allow the land to help us with that conversation, we won't have to carry it. So if someone's standing there getting mad at you and you turn sideways, all of that just goes to the land. All of that anger goes to the land, right? We don't have to take it on, right? We use the rocks. We use like on here, there's cedar, right? Like there's so many different things each nation has to use, and it allows the process to move smoother, gentler. When I'm doing one-on-one, I light a sage or a sweetgrass before the session, or I'll light it after, depending on how heavy it was, right? So I'm allowing myself to let go of it immediately so that I'm not carrying it. Because if I start carrying it, then my children carry it. And then when my children carry it, their children will carry it. So it's passed on that way. But if I teach them how to let it go and how to utilize the land to support us through any of it, and it's not just one piece that's going to carry us through, it's a collective, right? If I'm sitting with an elder who's teaching me something, I'm going to learn that and utilize that. And I'm going to find strength in finding my voice and that ability to share that as well, right? As we look at our spirit, we look at our belief and we look at trust. If we don't have any of those elements, we will not utilize any of the medicines, because we need all of those in order to start that healing. And it's a very gentle healing. Once you have trust, once you have belief, once you have spirit, because our spirits were impacted. I was taught as a young man that when we are impacted by trauma, our spirit leaves us. And I was impacted by trauma at a young age. My dad died when I was young. I witnessed my mom through horrific relationships where she suffered abuse. I went through, watched through addictions, being displaced, and then returning. So definitely trauma has been a part of my life since at a very young age, right? So, and sometimes we're just born right into it, and it's really challenging and how to maneuver through it, because then if I don't learn how to use the medicines, I am engaging into spaces where I'm creating trauma for myself, like struggling with an addiction, right? And having to live a life without any of these medicines to help me. And I believe like our spirit is always communicating with us. But because of the vicariousness that we have, and because of the trauma that we have seen, heard, or witnessed, anything, we automatically revert our minds to support it with a negative. But if we learn to strengthen our spirit, we're going to hear those messages a lot clearer. And I always wondered how a traditional person would give me a gift, for example, and he said, my spirit was just telling me, you're going to need this gift. And that intrigued me. It's like, how can you listen to your spirit? How can you strengthen your spirit? How can you have a conversation about it, right? So healing through culture and collective kindness is always about connecting with your ancestral knowledge, I believe. It's about learning and seeing other traditional people and just taking that and thinking about it and reigniting. So like fire starting in our brains is like we're trying to ignite a fire in our minds to reconnect with our own culture, reconnect with our ancestors, reconnect with our knowledge keepers, right? So, and the only way we can do that in a good way, I believe, is with our medicines and strengthening us and supporting us. And I was told never go into our mind without culture, because our mind is a very dangerous space. We can walk around in there for eons and get lost, but if we go in there guided by culture, we'll be strengthened, and we know that we are always connected to our people in our community, in our family. I'll share it. Go to Tara now.
Thank you. So healing through culture and collective kindness. I had lost our grandmother, or we had lost our grandmother a couple of years ago, and understanding that trauma shows up physically for you at times and it sits within your body. I remember after her burial, I just remember being kind of like in zombie mode. I don't know how I was functioning, but it wasn't until I had emergency grief sessions lined up with my mental health provider. And she walked me through an IFOT process, and it was so powerful because I didn't understand what was going on with my body until she brought me to the point is that I'm in survival mode because a part of my grief process triggered a piece of trauma that I had experienced in my childhood. So we did very much utilize the land. I remember being parked down by Radley Beach, absorbing the water, absorbing the rain and the trees that were surrounding. So it was able to calm me as I was curious with these emotions and to work through it. We talked about coming back to all my relations and understanding that it wasn't a collective, or it wasn't all mine that I was carrying. It was collective, something that I shared with my sister, something that I shared with my mom, something that I shared with my grandmother. So understanding that and finding that inner message that I'm going to be okay and that I'm here now and that I'm an adult and I'm safe, and reminding my body that I'm safe and that this is a part of a process in life that we all have to experience, whether we like it or not, whether we're ready for it or not, and that there's always going to be some guidance there for us. So being gentle throughout that process. Also going back to medicines, I have a cedar candle that I always keep with me. I always bring it to my sessions when I do IFOT sessions with people. And then I offer the smudge sprays. So there's aromatherapy, sage, and cedar and sweetgrass that I offer them to help with that calming effect again after. But and 100% of the chances are after we're done our IFOT process, people are a lot more grounded and present. So the smudge sprays just really help to give it another kick in the pants. Thank you.
Thank you all for sharing, Veronica, for sharing about the good medicine of laughter and the good medicine that we share within with each other. Henry, about intergenerational healing that's needed, whether it's intergenerational healing upwards or downwards within our generations. And of course, both Henry and Tara for sharing about the land and water-based healing. That was very, very impactful. So I believe that's the end of our presentation. So we're gonna welcome back Serene to kind of walk us through some of the questions. The chat feature has been very lively, so thank you everybody for taking the time to share some comments, but as well as some questions that you have. So for the next 10-15 minutes, we'll do some Q&A. Serene.
Great. Our first question is, it's for Tara. What is the self-development program your mother went through? Thanks for sharing.
There's a few actually. So she's done the life skills coaching certificate, and that was with Madeline Dunkley and Lee Couchin. And then the next one, I believe, was the Choices Seminars. And then after that, we went further into the Hoffman process out of Calgary. And then there's also the Transformations program that we assist with coaching. And there is a similar group that I think it's called the Break Free Seminars. So it's all personal development where you're able to sit with yourself for 4 to 5 days and ask yourself these questions and work with yourself and really spend time with addressing healing and what that looks like for you.
Thank you. Our next question is, are you seeing any progress / shifting from the "it is not what is wrong with you" to "what happened to you" as an overall approach / attitude from healthcare providers?
Serene, could you ask the question one more time, and then do we want to start in the same order that we've had, or if anybody has a specific response, then we could just raise our hand from there.
Okay. The question is, are you seeing any progress / shifting from "it is not what's wrong with you" to "what happened to you" as an overall approach / attitude from healthcare providers?
I would say not necessarily like healthcare like in the hospital or the doctors, so to speak. I would say a lot more from other mental health practitioners who maybe have been trained in the Western spaces. I would say in my experience, they're way more open and are really coming to that and understanding things from a different perspective and open to understanding how we do work as well. That's just my brief answer. I don't know, Henry, Tara.
Yeah, definitely. Being of a person who attended a lot of appointments with others and for myself as well. Not too much of a shift from what I see. There's some slight shifts, but all depends on like when you look at allies, like when you're going into a, like in Prince George, the clinic downtown, Central Interior Native Health, where you have allies like coming together to support an Indigenous population. You can see shifts in that space, but when you go into the bigger, larger entities, I don't see too much of a shift because a lot of it is inundated by backlogs and they're just trying to process you through.
So the only thing that I would add here is I see a shift in commitment towards change, but necessarily on the ground level, the shift is, if there is a shift happening, it's moving slowly. So it's not very evident, I would say, on my own personal point of view.
So it's kind of like an iceberg kind of going really slowly. Our next question is there any funding available to create health programs to support community to help support emotional and mental and physical impacts for experienced trauma?
I think that's only like within your health authorities in your area. For myself, like within BC here, it's First Nations Health Authority that is taken over for our communities. So maybe Veronica has a little bit more on that.
Yeah, that's actually just what I was going to say. First Nations Health Authority is the main funder for any kind of work like that. And oftentimes, like there's land-based healing funding, there's cultural support funding, there is trauma-informed funding. Really, you need to talk to the CHR. They can connect with whoever's in the region, depending on what region you're in. There's definitely some funding there, is my understanding. I just wanted to actually, this is a great segue, the work that we do through Indian Residential School Survivor Society, I'm going to do a little bit of a plug here. We do offer our services for free. So you can go on our website, IRSSS.ca, and there's cultural services request form. You can just go on there. That's the best way to request our services. And even if you don't know exactly what you want, because we have lots of different, different support. Cultural support, we have resolution health support workers, we have our Northern Trauma Informed support workers, we have MMIWG, but that's the best way to connect with us, and our services are free.
Thank you. Our next question is, do you utilize the medicine wheel approach to healing the individual holistically, like mental health, physical, emotional, and spiritual needs, and the therapy for the individual?
Yeah, definitely. We do utilize the medicine wheel aspects when we're having conversations. IFOD has taught us how to sit with the person and how to lean into the land, looking at creating balance. We are focusing on aspects of what's going on for them today, not the full picture. Like when a person comes in who suffers from trauma, there's so much trauma sometimes that we have to slice it thin, and then we have to look at what's going on with them today. How is that impacting them physically? How does trauma sit with the body? right? And how do we make a movement, whether we utilize land, air, water, fire medicines, and create a shift within them. So the medicine wheel is kind of one of the guidelines when we look at where the trauma is sitting physically, emotionally, spiritually.
Yeah, I'd just like to add to that. I think that one of the things that's really important, not only in our team, but also throughout IRSSS, is our own personal wellness. We do a lot of heavy work with lots of different people in different areas, and incorporating some of those medicine wheel teachings for our own staff is really important, whether it's very direct or if it's just very general in terms of when we do check-ins, like how are we doing, spiritually, mentally, physically, and how can we, because we're never perfectly in balance, but how are we doing and how can we change that?
So what I would add to that as well is just a reminder that every healing journey is individual. So for example, when I was younger, I focused a lot on the physical side. So now that I'm, of course, moving along into my journey, it's more sometimes on the emotional side or incorporating more of that spiritual side to my own journey. Again, every healing journey is individual and sacred. So the components will be different for each person.
We have another question that's kind of similar to the last question that we had. This person has anxiety when they're trying to relearn their language or learn their language. And they were wondering if they couldn't finish the course because of this anxiety, and they were wondering if you had any tips for them.
Yeah, language is such a big thing. Learning it, because we were not a part of it, how it was passed on to generation to generation. We're impacted by the words that are shared with us and taught to us and how to only speak English, right? So a lot of those things sit within my mind. I can only speak on my own experience when it comes to language, that I struggle with the learning aspect as well, because there's so much things when it comes to languages, like how my parents speak to me versus the family next door and how they speak and how they hear things. And it's all about building a relationship with our tongue and our voice. Like if we can build a relationship with ourselves and be comfortable starting to speak, then we have to build a relationship with the people closest to us to practice more and ask them, what are you hearing if you're not hearing what I am saying? So that removes that anxiety aspect of not knowing if we're doing it incorrect. If they keep saying, I don't understand what you're saying, it's like, well, what are you hearing? And then they'll give you that gentle, for me, that's what they would do for me. I don't know if Tara has anything to share.
Asking yourself, is this all mine? This anxiety that I'm holding, acknowledging where you're holding it in your body, if it's showing up with your heart racing or maybe trembling or something, and asking yourself, is this all mine? Do other people in that class feel the same as I do? Did my mom dad feel this when they were trying to learn their language? And then understanding that it could be an intergenerational, like Henry mentioned, feeling because of that fear of speaking your language. So acknowledging those pieces and look at the benefits. If you work through that anxiety and be curious with it. Let anxiety be your friend. Treat it like your friend. How would you help and support somebody that is experiencing anxiety? and do that same for yourself. How would you help your friend through it? Somebody that you care deeply for. And because we do need to walk gently with ourselves. And sometimes that we're so hard on ourselves that we don't understand, or we don't remember that we need to be gentle with ourselves through those processes too.
Thank you. I liked what Henry was saying about the self-reflection, and then I liked how Tara was telling us that to accept anxiety, that it's going to be there, but work through it, not against it. That's a great positive way to navigate anxiety, especially with wanting to learn your language, because there's so much joy that comes with that. So we have another question here. Are there communities where elders, men, women are organized to be able to be present to help our people with healing with grief and loss? And do they have funding for like things like tobacco, other medicines, or anything to help the family that's going through grief and loss?
Yeah, I mean, every single community is different, right? And it would be really hard to talk about each community when, you know, we have connections with a lot of them. I can just speak to what our team does. You know, Tara really shared a lot about the medicines that she brings in. We have a lot of medicines that we bring in. Each of our team members has different gifts, right? Like we do offer brushings and stuff, or smudging, or, you know, there's different ceremonies that we're able to offer depending on who it is. And we do help support with grief and loss, as well as crisis response, as well as ceremony, and lots of different aspects. So that's what I can speak to. Henry, do you have more?
Yeah, definitely. Grief and loss is such a huge thing within each community, each urban community, right? With this opioid and everything, right? It's in COVID, right? Those have just made grief and loss come to the forefront, right? And it's everybody's facing it. I don't believe anyone has not been impacted by either one of those two elements. There are places out there you can ask for grants, like Native Indian Brotherhood, right? So you can go into those spaces. You can watch out for harm reduction grants within First Nations Health Authority. We, as IRSSS, can also provide some support with grief and loss as well. So you just go onto our website and request support for grief and loss. So, and we do that within BC. So we look at what do you need? Do you need us to be there with our medicines, or do you need us to help guide the conversation of grief and loss, right? And allow that space to be supported, right? So we can allow ourselves to always have medicine with us to support us with the conversation and to help move that conversation within the class or whatever it is, your family, right? So you can always ask for independent support as well, like for your family. So we can do a Zoom meeting with your family and talk about grief and loss. And that's a beautiful way to get your family together and start the conversation. And how do we sit with grief and loss? How do we move through it as a family? And how do we support others within the community, right? So those are some things that, like with technology today, that ability to get that support when our families separated too. So, Tara, you have anything?
I forgot the question. I was looking at the questions in the chat box.
Oh yeah, sorry. I think it might have been a a Q&A question.
It was about accessing like medicine.
Oh, the elders. Yeah. So communities that are working and developing, there's very few that I've seen just to our local area that have really embraced programming. I've noticed some communities will post and advertise grief and loss workshops, and a lot of people, I guess, may not be ready for that. I've been encouraging people to reword your workshop. Call it something else, and some people might show up. Because it's like, I know that when I'm facing grief, I don't want to cry. I'm just tired of crying, right? And I don't want something in that workshop to present that's going to open up something, and then I'm going to be crying in front of everybody. So that's my own shame that I carry. But what I've noticed is that there are communities out there that have some systems in place where we've noticed, even with employment and training, that having an elder in the room, it really helps to bring that calming effect, especially somebody that has that's really strongly connected to culture and that have been able to guide families through these processes. There is a really big calming effect to having somebody there that knows that, and they're able to offer and share their wisdom through their experiences. But it's up to each community to develop those, to find the resources that their communities are open to. Like mentioned, like there was several programs that my mom had gone to and our community has, and some things work better than other ways. And so there's no cookie cutter approach. It's identifying what wellness looks like for you and your community, asking your community, like focus groups, what does wellness look like, traditional wellness look like for you? And then looking at what resources are there to support that is also another question to ask yourself. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And then we just have this last question here. We have a nurse and healthcare worker that's non-Indigenous that's wondering what they could do to take on a more supportive role, and recognize that they recognize it takes a community to make this change, and they want to be a part of this change and creating this change. So they were just wondering what sort of things do you recommend that they do with their practice?
Sorry, I was just responding to one of those questions in the chat. Can you just repeat that real quickly again about the nurse?
So there's a nurse that's non-Indigenous that's wondering what sort of things they can do to help create change and be a more supportive person with trauma-informed care. And they're just wondering what sort of things you guys recommend.
Well, a lot of the things that I witnessed, and I always say we're all humans, right? And just being a part of the community and being a part of the conversation, right? And removing that aspect of Indigenous, non-Indigenous, and looking at like a two-eyed seeing, right? And walking through in a way of being mindful of, we're just looking at a wellness aspect of a person or a community, and we can do what we can do. We can't go above and beyond of what our capacity is, but we can do what we can. And it's a simple thing of like how I was taught too. Like if I have $10 and I see someone who needs money, I give them my $10. Now I'm without. So we always have to provide what we can, not give everything, because if we give everything, we're left with nothing. So, and that's with medicines, that's with anything. I just used the dollar as an easy example to look at, and how we share things in our lives. And there is no right or wrong way to be or to do. I just feel that it's, if you're going in with an open heart and an open mind, remove those aspects of that I'm different from you. We are all the same. We're all human beings, and we all walk this earth and we'll walk this path of wellness together, and just allow your heart to guide you, right? And speak from the heart. It's like when we bring in those other entities of race or culture, then we are starting to separate, right? And those are just things of how I feel when it comes to that piece. And just be gentle with yourself. It's just like the learning our language. We're learning to connect and reconnect and all of those things. Tara, do you have anything, or Veronica?
Sure. It's kind of like asking permission. So just out of curiosity, finding gentle ways to ask those questions to Indigenous families. What are your practices for childbirth, or what are your practices? Like if you work in a hospital, you'll notice that when babies are born, everybody in the family shows up. There might be 10 people in the delivery room and you don't know why. Babies are very precious and important to our Indigenous communities. And a lot of the time there's going to be mom, there's going to be sister, there's going to be auntie, there's going to be grandma. I think, and especially at the time of the birthing, my middle son was born 2 weeks after I'd lost my grandfather, and there was literally 15 people that showed up at 1 o'clock in the morning to greet him, to welcome him. So understanding and being flexible to that, like, because it was a very important timeline in our family's life, to acknowledge that we had just lost our grandfather 2 weeks before, and then his great grandson is born. Understanding practices of loss. A lot of our communities, when somebody's in their last days, you're going to see a lot of people come in to visit, and that's for them to pay their respects to them and tell them how they contributed positively to their life and how much they mean to them. So that's also another important process for our communities. It was really neat to see the healthcare workers really acknowledge that, and through the pandemic, and they were able to access Zoom for a lot of families to be able to do that. So people weren't entirely alone in their last moments. So just allowing yourself to find gentle ways to ask curiosity, because not all of our communities have the same practices. Just being, that's the word of the day, curious. Be curious, be gentle. Thank you.
Thank you so much. What I gathered from that is being genuine and intentional, and then just soft-spoken. Yeah, I'll hand it back to Jordy to do the closing, and then you can hand it back to me, and then I'll do the final closing.
For sure. Thank you, Sarain, and thank you everybody for joining us today. Some great messages in the chat. Great conversations we had today. And yeah, so I would just like to say thank you to our three panelists, Tara, Veronica, and Henry. Wonderful words. Sarain, Cynthia, Nicole in the backgrounds. Thank you for all the support that you've been doing throughout this work. So I'll pass it over to Veronica if she has any final words, and then we'll move to Henry and then Tara.
Great, thank you. I was just like trying to type something in the chat. I just want to say thank you to everyone who took some time today just to sit and be with us and you know, really get curious. I think that's what the word of the day is, and gentle, like Tara said, but also like the really good questions. I want to encourage everyone to check out our website, of course, but also we have a Northern Trauma Informed Facebook page, and you can see some of the kinds of work that we're doing in community, as well as reach out to our team to, we're always there just for some support. Sometimes it could be online, over the phone, or in person. And I raise my hands to all of you. Hi.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for allowing me to share some words today, to know that the words that I shared would come from experience within my family, within my learning and my healing and my journey. And I was I'm very appreciative you allowed me to share that a little bit about myself. And I apologize if I offended anyone with anything I had to say. Just know that I'm just sharing from a space of knowing, and that I'm just grateful that you were allowed time and space to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you for having us today, and thank you for logging in to ask questions and allowing space for us to share about our own experiences of our own life, or family, or community, or communities that we visited. And as Henry said, I apologize if I may have brought up or surfaced things for other people with my own experience. If you have Kleenex available next to you, something quick that you can do is a quick brush down, acknowledging that the Kleenex comes from trees, it comes from the land. You don't want to carry any of the stuff that we brought today. You could also use your hands if you don't have that. So just feel all of that brushing off of yourself. If you want, go outside as well. Take a look around, take in a deep breath, feel all of that cold or warm air in your belly and a slow release. Look at the mountains, look at the tree if the sun's out, or like in my area, the wind will blow you over. Thank you for having us today, Masai.
Thank you. And thank you to all our guests and everyone that joined us today. It was so great to talk to Jordy, Veronica, Henry, and Tara. And it was a great discussion. It was great to learn about culturally safe approach to healing through culture and collective kindness, and intergenerational healing and land and water-based healing. Just before we end this webinar, I'd love to bring your attention to our upcoming learning circles. You can sign up for our website at www.learningsircle.ca. Our next upcoming learning circle is the past, present, and co-developed future of services for children and youth with support needs. And that's on May 4th. And thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you at our next learning circle. Limit, thank you.